No BS Nutrition is planting microgreens on their windowsill, and we're not mad about it.
This is a 1-hour food fight against diet culture and its fake science messages.
Instead, we're passionate about celebrating real wellness.
I'm registered dietitian Hannah McGee.
And I'm neuroscience PhD student Tareq Youssef, and this is No BS Nutrition. Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of No BS Nutrition.
Hey guys,
the quarantine.
Welcome to NBSN. Tareq, it's been a while.
It's been a while. We're weirdly wearing the exact same clothes. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you can see us. You can see my goatee that I absolutely dragged to hell, heaven, and heck on the last episode of the podcast. Which probably, honestly, if we recorded another week after this, it would look exactly the same.
Do you think?
My facial hair grows so slowly.
Yeah.
You know what I wanted to talk about this morning?
What?
Have you ever had a random memory? Just out of nowhere, you remember something that happened a long time ago?
Probably. I think so.
So random. Why am I even thinking about that? So I had one the other day.
Okay.
And I wanted to save it to talk to you. To talk about it with you on the podcast.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, this is going to be really... I've played this up way too much. It's going to be very underwhelming. One time, I was in a cab, and the driver told me he wanted to start a natural soap company.
Okay.
And I didn't know what to do with that on the cab ride.
No kidding.
I was just like, okay. All right, cool. I didn't know what to do with that. I've had lots of weird cab conversations. I
honestly don't think I have had that many because usually I'm an introvert and usually I'm in a cab with other people, so I let them do the talking.
I've never started any of these. I'm looking at my phone I just want it's fine, we don't have to talk, I'm tipping you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I appreciate the service, really.
Yeah.
But I don't want to chat.
I agree. One thing, the only cab driver conversation experience I can remember that I've had is when I was in Chicago with Pat, and we were there for his work. So he was at a work thing, and I was Ubering somewhere by myself, and I don't know how we got on the topic, but I don't know. The Uber driver must have asked me what I did or whatever, and I told him I was a dietitian. Bad move. I'm never doing that again, because the entire ride he asked me for
an occupation where someone can give you you can give someone advice.
The whole ride he just kept telling me how he wanted to lose weight and what he should be doing, and it was brutal.
How do I squeeze intuitive eating into...
Seriously, I was I did not know how to talk to him. I was just and people he just it was should I eat carbs? I cut this out. I'm gonna cut all. He's just what should I cut out? What should I cut out? And I'm ugh. Anyways, so yeah. Well, soap company. That's I don't know if I would know how to respond to that either.
I hope that cab driver is doing well.
I hope he started his soap company.
I hope he started his natural soap company.
Yeah.
I also was once in a cab with a flat earther.
Oh, dear.
So I used to do...
oh, God.
When I was in early years of my undergrad, I used to do community outreach, science experiments with kids. So
very cool.
The company I worked for would give me I could just get a taxi to
the
community. So often they'd be half an hour from the city, 45 minutes from the city.
Right.
And I didn't have a car, so I would have cab drivers, and it was that thing of don't talk about what you do, because I had a box of science stuff.
Oh, okay.
I had a lab coat or whatever. And he was like, "Oh, you're a scientist." I was like, "Well, no, I'm an undergrad, but I'm studying science." He's like, "Oh, so the moon landing was faked, right?" I was like, "Okay."
Oh, that's worse than being asked nutrition questions.
He told me the Earth was hollow, it's all it's made out. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh.
It was a weird cab ride.
I honestly would not know what to say.
I've been in some great cabs, really nice people.
Yeah, for sure.
But also, there's that. One time I was in a cab, and I hope she started her company. This.
Oh my
driver
God.
Told me she wanted to start. I actually love this idea. I think it's great. A cab service just for women.
Oh
And
yeah.
she wanted to call it Maxi Cab.
Like Maxi Pad from Maxi.
I want to shout her out. I hope she started her
I feel
company.
like you've told me that before.
I'm like the Dragon's Den of cab drivers. Like when I get in a cab, people talk to me about what company they want to start.
What's the one that, what does Pat call his, you know how he, do you know this?
No, what?
I don't know. I think it's when he was, I don't want to, this is, I mean, it's Pat, but he would drive people around. Like, I think like Sarah and Victoria, so like Pat's sister and her wife, and Caitlin and like some of her friends, and like
He called himself a service or something?
no, he would call it his Luber, so like his lesbian Uber.
I love, but yeah, his sister's gay, so she loved that.
No, I know. Yeah. So yeah, he would call, but also it could be the ladies' Uber, like the Luber. Yeah.
I wonder what I've had. Oh, one time I was in a cab, and we drove past a Trump protest.
Oh God.
And and it was awesome. Like our cab driver was like, "Oh, I know those people protesting." Like we like rolled down the windows. And we were like, "Woo!" Like they were anti-Trump.
Oh,
we were like,
God.
"Yeah!" Like
I thought you meant it was like a Make America Great
they were,
Again.
like, protest. It was just after the election.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
people were protesting Trump, and we were like in the protest, like in the middle of the intersection. Our cab driver was like honking. We were like all like shouting.
Oh my God. Wow.
I've been in some fun.
I guess it would be a rally if it was a pro-Trump. It wouldn't be a protest. Yeah.
Oh,
Anyways, yeah.
I've been in
Wow.
some interesting cabs.
You sure have.
Yeah.
Interesting life
It
experiences.
is kind of like you kind of like when you travel, and I love that feeling when you're traveling and like you like take a cab. And
I know.
You know, like that person like knows nothing about you, so you're just like in a new place.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know. Yeah, I'm a dietitian. Like I'm just in Chicago. Whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. No, for sure.
It's so fun. I love being that person, like the new person in the room. You know?
Yeah. I love traveling. I miss traveling.
Oh, I love.
Definitely gonna travel when able.
Exactly.
When we're able. Yeah. All right. Well. Oh yeah. I guess it's my turn to ask you, Tareq. Please tell me, what is your BS of the week? Let's hear it. Let's debunk some BS.
Let's debunk some BS. Well, I actually caught some BS in the wild.
Oh my God.
So on our very safe walk around the neighborhood.
In the wild. In the neighborhood.
Recently. In my own community, in my backyard. I don't have a backyard. I live in a very small apartment. There is an alternative medicine clinic.
Okay.
Nearby.
Sure.
And you know, a lot of people have been putting up like nice messages in their windows recently. Have you noticed that?
Yep.
So this alternative medicine clinic wanted to, I guess, put a nice message in their window.
Okay.
To keep people going during quarantine.
Okay.
And they were, you know, they wrote it in like, I'll send you this picture, by the way.
Okay.
I don't want to like, I don't know.
Yeah, we're not going to blast them or anything. Yeah, for sure.
I would love to interview them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like then they can like blast themselves, but oh, seriously. But I'll send you this picture. Actually, I'll send it to you while I'm talking to you about it.
Okay.
I have to zoom in to see.
Okay.
But they were advertising. They wrote on their window like with erasable marker, I guess. And they were advertising something called Coherent Breathing. Have you ever heard of this?
No, but I've heard of mouth taping.
Yeah, they heard about it. I sent you a higher res one.
Okay.
So, you know, lots of people have been writing nice messages on their windows to help people during COVID. You know, you walk by. So this is like kind of, people want to imagine what this looks like. It's like a window of this alternative medicine clinic.
Yeah.
And they wrote on the window.
Yeah.
So you can see it from the outside.
Yeah.
So they're advertising something called Coherent Breathing. So basically it's very, very few long breaths per minute. So you take 5 to 6 seconds of a breath in.
Yep.
And then it's 5 to 6 seconds of a breath out.
Sure.
So you end up breathing only about 5 to 6 times a minute.
Yeah.
So I will say I did the age-old trick. Look up the journal articles.
Sure.
There are
0.
surprisingly very, 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 very few papers on coherent breathing.
Yep.
And almost all of them are from low impact journals. Basically,
Yep.
it's a scientific journal that doesn't get cited a lot.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that there can't be good science in it, but it's just a journal that doesn't tend to like drive the prominent discussions in the field.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not mainstream. It's not being picked up.
Yeah.
And that means that other scientists might not deem that as like very credible, or at least like at the frontier of whatever is being developed.
Right.
So not that I would believe any of the results in an alternative medicine journal anyway. But absolutely none of the papers discuss the claims that are being, some of the claims that are being mentioned on this window.
Right.
So for people listening and for people watching, because I'm not going to put this picture up, but so they wrote coherent breathing at the top of the window, and then they wrote breathe just by your belly, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out for 5 minutes. Okay, and now once you've done that magic, get ready for what's about to happen to your body. Okay, everybody? 1, boost your immune system, which we definitely know works. Just kidding. We've talked about it on almost every episode this season.
I know.
Boosts your sleep. Literally no evidence to show that from what I saw. Boosts your calm and relaxation. That one I can kind of get behind, because it's kind of like mindful meditation.
Yeah.
Like you're sitting there trying to breathe and focus on your breathing.
Yeah.
You're probably going to feel a little bit more calm and more relaxed. Every time I try to meditate, I absolutely cry my eyes out. So it always ends up being I have a really weird emotion.
You've mentioned that before, that when you try to meditate, you just cry.
If I like literally meditate, like actually meditate, I always end up making so many. I'm not like sobbing, but like my ears, it's like a faucet. My eyes.
I was like, what?
I don't like that. That's a bad visual. Okay, the next thing they promote is that it's going to boost your concentration and memory.
Okay.
By the way, no evidence for that. It's going to decrease anxiety.
Oh my god.
Maybe in the moment. Maybe in the moment.
The last one I'm reading.
Not overall. The last one, and this is why I took the picture, and this is why it's the BS of the
Probably
week.
the most problematic one.
Exactly, the most problematic one. Well, aside from boosts immune system and sleep, it decreases weight. That's the last one that they put on the window. Okay, so I have many problems with this already. So, first of all, I mean, it goes without saying, it doesn't decrease weight. There's no evidence for that. There's no evidence that coherent breathing is going to decrease weight. It's kind of like a what the fuck. Like that's.
Why would you say that? Yeah.
My other problem with that is that this is not helpful right now. Like a lot of people are worried about the so-called quarantine 15, which we've talked about in the first episode of this season. Seeing something like this is probably going to make people who are weight conscious even more anxious about their weight.
Right.
So I don't think it's helpful to promote that kind of messaging. That's so wrong.
Yeah.
Coherent
breathing. Such BS.
Decreases your weight. That's not helpful to anybody.
No.
And then my other larger problem with it is why not just like call this what it is, like mindful breathing, or just like relaxing breathing. Why give it this like fancy name, coherent breathing, and then make all these bogus claims about it?
Yeah, I agree. That is, I'm sitting here trying to think like how they could be like correlating this breathing with weight loss, and like what their reasoning behind that would be. Like obviously we know there's no research that says that. So But I'm just trying to, like, you know, think of the person who wrote that, like, why they would write that.
One thing that I thought of was, like, there's some, like, there's some weight loss research that shows, like, you need good sleep in order to get the benefits of weight loss from exercise and dieting, because during sleep, like, we're literally, like, exhaling. The exhalation has something to do with, like, expelling.
Yeah, and, like, poor sleep affects your
for the weight loss.
Being
I don't know.
Being sleep deprived does, and we could do a whole episode. We could do a whole episode on this too. But it affects your food choices. Like, there's physiological and, like, hormonal reactions. You know, when you are sleep deprived, certain hormones are elevated and certain ones are decreased.
I know I've read that, like, we're more likely to seek out like denser carbs,
sugar, things like that when we're sleep deprived. Yeah. That is true. So, I mean, maybe they're pulling from there. I was also thinking maybe they're pulling from, like, a mindful eating perspective, like when you're, I don't know, if you meditate or you pay more attention to how you feel, your breath, whatever. Maybe they're, like, correlating that with, like, you'll be more mindful in all things, eating included, and that could result in weight loss. I don't know. I'm just trying to, like, I'm just thinking out loud, seeing, like, what they're pulling this from. Obviously, we know it's bullshit, but
totally.
Anyways, yeah, that's really
and just, like, so annoying to me that they would do this, like, during quarantine, like. People who are worried about their weight, seeing that is not going to make them feel better.
Why not just leave it at, like, reduced anxiety, reduced, or, like, more feelings of, like, calm or whatever? Why not just leave it at that? Why do you have to bring weight into it? Like,
and saying boosts immune system, like, total.
What? Yeah, breathe. What? I don't get that. Breathing in slowly, taking deep breaths, also, that doesn't boost your immune system.
As, like, a 15-year-old kid seeing that, I'd be like, I'm Coherent
Me
breathing.
Too. Oh my god, 100%. If 16 years old, like, in high school, if I read that, I would be like, oh, I guess that's something I need to try.
So that made me really annoyed, especially because it was, like, right down the street.
Yeah, I'm annoyed at that too. And thank you for sharing it. Thank you for debunking it. I'm sure there's people out there who need to hear it. So
if you're listening, bleep this company.
Yeah.
Reach out, and we'd love to talk.
Yeah, I mean, not saying that coherent breathing can't be beneficial, but it's not going to boost your immune system or help you lose weight.
No, and I don't think it's going to increase your memory.
No. Well, no.
In a drastic
way. No, I mean, we could look into this, but I mean, I think there is some meditation and, like, mindfulness has been studied, you know, relating to things like we said, attention and anxiety and maybe memory. I'm not going to say it results in improved memory, but I know that it's been studied. So, I mean, that's something we could look at. But I don't think that I don't know. It makes it out like that specific type of breathing, not just like any meditation or any mindfulness. You know what I mean? It makes it out like this magic coherent breathing results in all of those things, and
like doing this for 5 minutes is going to provide all of these.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I don't think that's going to actually.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much. That's important. I think it's really important when we see things like that to call them out and talk about what's real, what's true.
Totally.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Speaking of what's real and what's true, we're going to dive into our episode topic, which is actually, this is going to be, like, okay, let's just get into it.
You're fired up already.
So, I'm fired up, but it's like, I'm so mad. I'm like, anyway, okay.
I'm excited to talk about this. I'm excited. This is something that I've seen a lot of misinformation about. I've seen a lot of this in, like, that wellness kind of influencer space, and it's something that is not well supported by good science. So I think it's important to talk about. So we're going to talk about food sensitivity testing. And there are, a few different forms of food sensitivity testing, so we'll touch on those. But I guess I want to give a little backstory first. So the first time I'd ever heard of a food sensitivity test was when I was a dietetic student in university. I've mentioned this before, but I was volunteering with a grocery store dietitian, and they, aside from doing like grocery store tours and cooking classes and things like that, they also see clients one-on-one. And so this dietitian, she was seeing a client who had undergone food sensitivity testing with their naturopathic doctor. And so basically the client had to get blood work, or like a blood test or blood work, ordered by the naturopath, and then have that blood work sent to a specific testing facility where they do food sensitivity testing. And basically they do IgG testing, or testing for IgG antibodies in the blood, to essentially, this is what they claim to do. If IgG antibodies come up for like certain foods in this testing, some tests test up to like 200 foods, where other ones just do like 90 to 100.
Sure.
And then based on that test, like how many IgG antibodies you had for each food on the list, like that's how quote unquote sensitive you were to that food.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Totally. So they're looking for immune markers, like levels of immune markers, to different like known food, basically like proteins.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess maybe we should back up a bit and do a little kind of definition of food sensitivities. So, we won't go too in depth because we did kind of talk about this a little bit before in another episode, but there's really like no actual definition for a food sensitivity. So it's essentially used as another term for food intolerance. The two are pretty much interchangeable. Like I said, we won't go too much into the nitty gritty of the definitions, because if you want, a more in-depth definition about food allergies versus food intolerances, you can listen to season 1, episode 9. That's where we kind of talked about lactose intolerance versus cow's milk allergy, and we went all into detail about intolerance versus allergy. But basically, a food intolerance or sensitivity occurs when you have some sort of adverse reaction to eating a food, whether that's due to an inability to digest the food or tolerate the food in certain amounts. Whereas with food allergies, your body has an immune-mediated response to that food, which can, in some cases, be fatal. So if you think of like a lot of peanut allergies can be fatal, or cow's milk allergies, things like that. So diagnosis of food allergies, true food allergies, can be done by an allergist or like a medical doctor specializing in that or in immunology. So they'll take your medical history and then perform a skin test for IgE antibodies. So those are like the immune or the antibodies that appear for like food allergies. For food sensitivities or intolerances, I'm just going to come out and say it, there are no validated tests for food intolerances or sensitivities. Nope, not even blood tests. So, this kind of gives away what we're talking about. But, usually when it comes to food sensitivities, they're identified, in working with a doctor or a dietitian using like a food symptom diary. So you'd be keeping track of what you're eating and what symptoms you're experiencing. Maybe elimination diets. So if you think about like the low FODMAP diet for GI conditions like IBS, that's a certain elimination diet where you cut out certain foods with certain components, and then under the supervision of your dietitian, you'd start adding them back in and keeping track of your symptoms to kind of pinpoint what you're sensitive to. And then another thing we talked about in season 1, episode 9 was the hydrogen breath test for lactose intolerance. So that's really the only one that's like validated for some sort of food intolerance. And then, these things, like I said, should be done under the supervision of like a dietitian or a doctor.
Totally, because otherwise, I mean, if I'm not wrong, it ends up being kind of a money trap, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like there's at-home testing, or there's like alternative medicine clinics that will claim to find out all these answers for you, but it does cost a lot of money.
It costs a lot of money. Yeah, I mean...
And again, like you're saying, none of those tests are valid.
Yeah, they're not valid. They're not clinically validated. And yeah, they're really expensive and not covered by insurance. So, yeah. So let me see. What did I want to say? So when I first had that experience with the client who had food sensitivity testing done, that was in like 2015, I think. So between then and now, there's been like a huge rise in at-home food sensitivity testing, or like at-home test kits where you either like take a DNA sample, so like your hair or your saliva, or you literally prick your finger and get a blood sample, and then you like send it back to the company. So the first one that comes to my mind is, and someone actually recommended this. Oh man, I should find your name so we can show you out. But the first one that comes to my mind is Everlywell.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that's a pretty well-known like food sensitivity test where you like do a blood sample and send it in, and they do the IgG testing in their like lab or whatever, and then they send you your results. So I think one that you mentioned, what was it? The DNA?
Well, what I was talking about earlier was all of this kind of reminds me of the like Ancestry DNA or like 23andMe test kits, which kind of like fall under the same premise. Like they're making people pay exorbitant amounts of money to give them their whatever DNA, and they compare whatever is in your sample to like a non-comprehensive data set that their models just like use by making like statistical judgments to see if like maybe compared to whatever population's data set they have, you might fall into a category that might be called like food sensitive for one thing or another, right? It's just like the ancestry, like the ancestry DNA kits, like, oh, like there's a possibility that like 20% of your DNA falls into a category that looks like people from whatever, Western Asia, for example. And it's all just basically statistical modeling that compares what's in your sample to the data set that they have, which again is not comprehensive. So there's lots of rooms for error, lots of gibberish that comes out of that. Like I remember CBC Marketplace did an episode using like the Ancestry DNA kits, and like 23andMe, they did a bunch of them, Heritage DNA, I think. And they had twins. Actually, one of the journalists on CBC Marketplace has a twin. So her and her twin did all of the tests, and they still got differences within the tests between each other.
Oh my gosh. Because
all of these companies are just like using math to compare your sample to whatever data set they have. So it's not a clinical judgment in that case. So even with these like nutrition like sensitivity tests, when you're sending them away to these labs, like Hannah was saying, they're not clinical decisions that are being made around your sample.
Oh my gosh.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. I'm trying to think of one thing I wanted to say. Just I think I might have confused some people, but I guess I didn't really give like what. I mean, some people might know this, but like what antibodies are and how they're produced. I just wanted to touch on that quickly.
Oh, sure.
So when our bodies are exposed to foods, there are different antibodies, so proteins made by the immune system that get produced. So there are actually 5 different subclasses of antibodies, and they all have different functions and different locations in the body. But if your body produces IgE antibodies, I kind of mentioned this, but to a certain food, you can have an allergic response. So if someone has a peanut allergy, they would have IgE antibodies in response to the protein in peanuts.
And if I'm not wrong, like just to like drive the point home, like what Hannah's saying, it triggers an immune response, which means that you're not just going to like feel kind of like tummy sick and like maybe get a headache. Like
no,
it's going to trigger like hives or like closing of your throat. Like,
yeah, for sure. Exactly. That's a really good point. And then IgE food allergy tests are clinically validated for diagnosing allergies. So like we use these in clinical studies. We use these in patients. Like doctors use this to diagnose food allergies, right? This is something that's widely recognized and used clinically to diagnose food allergies.
Right.
So then the food sensitivity tests, these look for IgG antibodies and then classify the appearance of IgG antibodies in response to eating certain foods as a food sensitivity. But the problem with that is that number one, IgG antibodies are the most abundant antibodies in the body. So they're like kind of like widely circulating, and they're not clinically validated, right? We've said this. No one's using these in studies to test for food sensitivities or, you're not going to your doctor to get this food sensitivity test done. It's not recognized, right?
That's why it's a great cash grab for all these like alternative medicine clinics.
Yeah. And actually, and I'll link these because I'm not going to go into depth of all these studies, but a lot of studies have shown that the appearance of IgG antibodies will be positive based on food exposure, meaning that just eating a food, whether you're allergic or not, like results in production of IgG antibodies. And a lot of times this actually demonstrates tolerance to a food, not intolerance.
I'll get into this a bit later with what I wanted to bring up, but allergies in general are even diagnosing an allergy compared to sensitivity using IgE antibodies can be kind of fraught as well, because you can also develop IgE antibodies to something that's not going to trigger a full-on allergic response. So especially for these other non-clinical tests, it's really not valid at all. It's just your normal body doing normal things, producing IgG antibodies sometimes. It doesn't mean that you have a sensitivity.
Yeah. And I actually saw a review of IgG food sensitivity tests from the Canadian Society of Allergies and Clinical Immunology. And so I'll link that in the show notes. But basically it's saying all of these things. And then there's actually, so like I said, the appearance of IgG antibodies actually, from what we've seen, and again, I'll link the studies, demonstrate tolerance to a food. So for some children with IgE, so true allergies, with IgE mediated allergies, it's been seen that they're actually more likely to have tolerance to foods when they have increasing IgG antibodies. Demonstrating tolerance. And then immunotherapy, or giving small amounts of an allergen, so say peanuts or whatever, to try and build tolerance in someone with an allergy, is associated with increasing IgG antibodies, so showing improved tolerance to that food. So one thing that really stands out to me is that a lot, and it's funny because I actually witnessed this, but a lot of people, when they get the results of these, whether it's an at-home test kit or sending a blood sample through their naturopath, when they get these test results back, or these IgG test results back, the things that are highest on, that have the highest amounts of IgG antibodies are the foods that they consume often, and foods that they really love. So I remember seeing certain wellness influencers promoting these food sensitivity test kits, and they were reporting their results, and they'd be oh my gosh, Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts were really high. I love Brussels sprouts. I eat them all the time. They're oh God, that's going to suck having to cut them out. And it's no, you're not sensitive to that. It's those IgG antibodies are high because you eat them a lot, and you have a lot of tolerance to them.
Reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you did a really fantastic job, Hannah, describing the difference between what's used clinically using IgE tests versus IgG tests, which these at-home test kits and naturopath clinics most often tend to use, because that's maybe the missing link there, because it's so easy maybe to see upon first glance they're doing an immune, they're looking for immune markers in my blood, it must be valid, right? But then understanding the difference between something as like minor as IgG antibodies versus IgE antibodies, like might help inform someone who's looking at these things to know like, oh, okay, well, this isn't validated.
Right. And I think what kind of makes me mad about these food sensitivity like test kits is that like on their websites, they market it like you might have, they say like, do you have undiagnosed or like food sensitivities that you don't know about? And then they like bring up, they're like, these are all symptoms of like food sensitivity. And like they just say the most like vague things like brain fog or like low energy or bloating or like things like normal things that people experience day to day. You know what I mean?
It's really perfect for targeting like a hypochondriac.
Yes, exactly.
Like they're going after people who are going to fall for like,
or even someone who does like have, maybe they do have some GI troubles or something that they're going through, that it could be something else. Like it could be a food intolerance, but it could be something else. And or you know, maybe you're just experiencing some constipation or something, like you haven't eaten enough fiber, you know what I mean? And there's so many other reasons too that could result in it, but then you get like roped into spending anywhere from like $100 to $500 on this food sensitivity test because they've basically like scared you into thinking that if you have any of these things, you could have a food sensitivity and you may need to cut out all of these foods, and then you go and get this testing done that isn't validated and actually could just be showing that you have tolerance to a food because you eat it so often. And then you're like left with fear of these foods and feeling like you have to cut them out.
I mean, this kind of all of like talking about all this makes me think of, there's an increased desire, both in research and in everyday life for more personalized medicine, right? Like taking a personalized medicine approach.
Yes.
And there's a really good review article that I read in preparation for this episode. It's about food allergy, but it also touched on food sensitivity in general, that I'll link in the show notes. It's pretty recent, from 2018. And they talk about how like, basically it comes down to personalized medicine is like a nice idea, and I'm quoting from their article, they say it remains elusive, especially with regard to food sensitivity diagnosis. It's something that's really difficult to do, and we're just really not there yet in terms of testing to have like really good results that tell us like what an individual's profile, like what's best for them to eat, that's not going to make them sensitive and like never make them sick. I mean, the best thing to do, like as they say and in the article, and as you've said and we've talked about before, is like if you do have GI troubles or you do have some issues, like approach your dietitian and your physician. They're the ones that are going to help you better your quality of life, not an at-home test kit or whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if you feel that like something you're eating is making you feel shitty for some reason, like if you could be right, but the most like scientifically reasonable test for that would be, like you said, to work with a dietitian, cut out possible like offenders for a couple of weeks, and then slowly reintroduce them back into your diet one by one, while taking note of changes or how you feel. I mean, to date there isn't a food sensitivity test or a test that like is valid enough to take the place of like doing that like trial and error.
Totally. Yeah. For food sensitivities, absolutely.
Yeah.
And and it's very, very complicated to research too, because there's all these intersecting factors: genetic, epigenetic, environmental. Like there's so many factors that go into how our body reacts to what we're eating. Yeah,
for sure. And
which makes it so difficult.
Absolutely. So one thing I wanted to say is that I think food sensitivity tests aren't wrong. Like just hear me out for a sec. So they're not, and this is actually I got this from an article in the journal Allergy and Clinical Immunology. And it said that these tests, so like sending this test kit off, or getting your naturopath to send your blood sample to a lab or whatever, like these tests likely measure IgG antibodies reliably. The catch is that the presence of them doesn't in itself indicate an intolerance. So like,
yeah, that's what you've been saying.
It's accurate, right?
The whole time.
Like you have those levels of IgG antibodies in your blood. Like absolutely, there's, we're not saying that's wrong. What is wrong is how we're interpreting the appearance of these antibodies.
Totally.
Yeah, that's
a really good point.
I think, do you have any other studies?
So in looking at the research, because it was all overwhelmingly like, this stuff is bogus, like you should really just work with your physician and dietitian if you feel like you have a food sensitivity. I thought it would be productive for me to look at some research that's actually looking at increasing the accuracy of some of these tests. It's like in the clinical setting. So I'm not talking about food sensitivity, but I thought maybe I'd focus on like a related topic, peanut allergy.
For sure.
So there is a lot I learned from looking at some of these studies that their peanut allergy diagnosis is still not like 100% accurate. So this first study that I'm talking about is from 2012, and it looks at, it's called Increasing the Accuracy of Peanut Allergy Diagnosis by using ARA-H2, which is an IgE immune marker.
Okay.
It's an IgE antibody. So why did they do this study? So Hannah brought up earlier how clinical history is actually really important for diagnosing things like food sensitivities and food allergies. And if we don't know clinical history, like in children or babies, for example, we don't know if they've had previous exposure to peanuts, for example, then you need to do an allergy test. Like that's why they're so important to have. So prick tests have really high sensitivity, but low specificity. So that's something we learn a lot about in research methods classes. So for people listening, if that kind of doesn't make sense, if something has high sensitivity, it's more high sensitivity and low specificity, it's more likely to give you a false positive.
Right.
It's going to say there is a problem if there isn't one.
Right.
More likely than not.
Right.
And this is the problem with peanut allergy tests. So, a physician is going to want to err on the side of caution, right? If their test gives a positive, they're going to want to say like, okay, well, I think you're allergic to peanuts.
Right.
Because they don't want to tell someone they're not allergic to peanuts, even though they know their test has some, rate of failure, and the person ends up having a food allergy. That's not a good idea. So there's this article goes into how, that causes unwanted burden on the healthcare system, and like what we've talked about before with food sensitivities and allergies that are misdiagnosed, there's an unwanted burden on the individual. Like you have to, work on restricting your diet from certain things, and, it's more energy that you expend not eating something because you think it's going to affect you in a certain way. Yeah. So usually to measure peanut allergy in the clinic, like Hannah was saying, they use IgE antibodies. Yep. And what they do is they look at how IgE antibodies come about in the blood from the entire complement of peanut proteins. So peanuts are, like other foods, are made up of a bunch of different proteins. So they're looking at what IgE antibodies are created to all of those proteins. So this is partly why skin prick tests and other tests don't always reliably predict allergy, because it's like kind of an unspecific test. You're looking at all of the proteins of a peanut. Sure. So instead, this study is talking about how we can use more specific tests, using subsets of peanut triggered antibodies that are more specific to allergy. And one of those is ARA-H2, which is found in 90 to 100% of patients with peanut allergy. Wow. Which is quite high compared to some of the others. So they want to see if the RAA-H2 antibody can accurately identify allergy. So what did they find? They did skin prick tests, and then they did oral food challenge. So they gave the people, these were all 1-year-olds. They gave the 1-year-olds peanuts.
Okay.
And then they measured their IgE levels. They collected the blood, and they actually used a labeling method, which I think is the most common way to find this. And they literally put like fluorescent labels on the blood.
Yeah.
To look for the different antibodies, one of them being ARAH2. So they tested using the whole peanut antibody versus the ARAH2 protein, and the ARAH2 antibodies seem to have way better performance compared to just using the full complement of peanuts,
right,
of the peanut protein. So what does this mean? They're trying to like further the diagnostic accuracy of peanut testing.
Yeah.
And what they recommend is doing whole peanut antibody tests followed by just the ARAH2 test to confirm the outcome of the first test. So why is this really important? Partly it's important because you want to reduce the need for an oral food challenge, right? Because I can imagine as a dietitian, like if someone thinks they're allergic to something, your first thought isn't like, go eat this, right?
Right.
You don't want to necessarily tell somebody to go consume something that they might be allergic to. So it could possibly also like reduce the burden on the healthcare system, people being referred to specialists if we're making better diagnoses quicker. So I'm kind of just really short now. I'm going to pivot to another study, and I just kind of want to talk about very simple thing from it. And from other studies that I read too, it seems that in general, I don't know if people want to take something away from this episode talking about sensitivities and allergies and testing for them.
Right.
And maybe you can speak to this a bit more. In general, something I learned from reading a lot of these studies is that early introduction of peanuts, like within the first 11 months of life, seems like a really good idea to decrease the chance of peanut allergy.
Yes, I believe that is true. I am not an infant feeding expert, but from what I understand, yes, that's it. You want to introduce it early. I know it seems like counterintuitive, like people are afraid to introduce high like allergen foods to their babies. But it's actually, it's recommended that you do it earlier in order to reduce risk of developing an allergy. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's really, isn't that interesting?
I mean, it's like so complicated. And I've read from and heard from physicians like so many times just saying like, like doing a skin test for like every food in the world just like isn't the best way about this. Like, we're gonna trigger false positives. Like you might not be like deathly sensitive or deathly allergic to whatever food. It's really more complicated than that.
Wow. Yeah.
And definitely those at-home test kits, like we were saying, is like not the way to go about it.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of makes me, and it ties kind of well into this, but you don't want to like trigger a false positive and then have your patient or your patient's kid or whatever have to avoid or like go through all the stress of like trying to limit these foods or avoid these foods completely in their diet. And that's the same like with these food sensitivity tests, is like they come back with, like I said, some of them come back with like a list of like 100 to 200 foods that you could possibly, according to these tests, like according to your levels of IgG antibodies, which we now know isn't, a valid indicator of sensitivity, but you don't know this when you're getting your results. So you could have all of these lists of foods, or this huge list of foods, and think you have to start like cutting a bunch of them out or limiting them in your diet. And that can be so stressful and also, unnecessary. So it's just resulting in this like unnecessary, a lot of times, I'm not saying in all cases, but a lot of times it results in this unnecessary restriction of your diet. And that's could, again, it's not a guarantee, but it could result in nutritional deficiencies, making it, it makes it a lot harder for you, depending on the food, to meet, especially if it's something you eat a lot, to meet your nutrition needs. And, could result in, like I said, deficiencies. And then it's also just like, it's kind of sad, but like you could have to cut out a food unnecessarily that you really enjoy, and that's no fun either, right?
And I hope people take away from like the the antibodies, the peanut allergy antibody study that I talked about is like, the science has to be so incremental. Like we have, like the scientists doing all that work, like they can only go so fast, right? Before, finding the next best test. Like if we're still worried about making our peanut allergy tests more accurate, like we're definitely nowhere near getting personalized medicine tests for food sensitivities.
Yeah.
Like the science has not caught up to what some of us are demanding from it yet.
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I think that's everything. I'm trying to just like scroll through my notes here and see if there's anything else I wanted to add. But I think I kind of covered everything. We said, if you feel like you're sensitive or intolerant to something, the best thing you can do is go talk to your dietitian, find a dietitian who can support you, and work with them to, first you'd have to give them a full, a history of what you eat and your symptoms and things like that. And then, you might have to, do a small elimination diet where you cut out possible offenders for a small amount of time and then try to add them back in and see what's affecting you and what's not. So
totally.
Yeah, that's really like I said, it's kind of the best thing we can do right now. There are no tests that can do any better. And actually some of these tests will make you unnecessarily cut things out or make you feel like you're sensitive to something when you're not. And that also brings up I seem to be doing this thing where I get this burst of like something I want to talk about right at the end of an episode. But it also, oh no, now I lost it. What was I going to say? Yeah, like
everyone's cheering. Yes.
That like effect where you have anxiety about a food or you think that you're intolerant to a food, maybe because one of these IgG tests told you were, that then results in you feeling some sort of symptoms or like crummy after you eat that food. You know what I mean? Like there's been, it's possible, we've talked about this before, for you to like convince yourself that you don't tolerate something, that so much so that you have all this anxiety about eating it. And then when you do eat it, you feel shitty or you feel some sort of adverse reaction.
The brain is so powerful.
Yeah, exactly. So that could also be, a result of this. You actually start feeling shitty after eating certain foods because you're so afraid to eat them now. So, yeah. Anyways, that just hit me. Totally. Hit me right now. I wanted to say that.
No, totally.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's what we have to say about food sensitivity testing. It unfortunately is something that's pretty popular, but doesn't have any sort of clinical validity. We're always going to side with what the research says. And the research says that those IgG antibodies are not telling us that you have a food sensitivity.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's my turn to ask you.
Oh, yes.
What's been tasty to you?
All right. What's been tasty to me this week? This week, for me, what's been tasty is doing a little bit of meal prepping. Now, I know you're going to like this one because you meal prep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know what? Since working from home, I worked from home before this COVID-19 pandemic. So that's what I mean by working from home. I've been working from home for like over a year now, but I haven't been doing a ton of meal prep for like the last year. When I worked in a clinical setting and when I did my dietetic internship and I was full-time in a clinical setting, I meal prepped a ton. Like on Sunday, I would get my groceries and then I'd come home and do a bunch of, I guess I shouldn't call it meal prep, but food prep. Like I'd wash and chop all my vegetables and I'd cook some grains and some proteins and things like that and prep breakfast ahead of time so that like...
My dream is to be the person who's rich enough to go to the store and buy the chopped onions.
Right? Like the pre-made stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. So I used to do that a lot and it was really helpful when I was really busy. Like when I was working in the hospital from 8 a.m. to like 5 p.m. then coming home exhausted, not wanting to cook dinner, I could just like throw some vegetables in the frying pan with some of the grains I'd already cooked and a protein. And it was like dinner. It was easy. But now I don't really do that. But last week I had a little burst of inspiration on Sunday. I had a bit of a busy week coming up and I had noticed that in the weeks prior I you know, I would get to like lunchtime or dinner time and I would be like, oh, I don't feel like, you know, preparing a meal right now. Like, I just wish my meal was right there in front of me. So I did like a really small kind of food prep. I cooked up, you know, a batch of rice, and I cut up a bunch of vegetables. I cut up some fruit. I made overnight oats for my breakfasts.
Oh,
and
lovely.
Yeah, and I just did, it took me like an hour. Like, I was like, I'm just going to do an hour of just prepping some things to make it easier. And it was so much easier throughout the week. Like, I felt so much more like, almost like relaxed come mealtime. Like, I already knew what was in the fridge that I could grab and kind of put together. Okay, my throat's really dry. One sec.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a really great idea. Yeah, definitely. It is helpful even now. Oh, spooky. Did you just bite me? I don't like that. Oh, my God. It is. She really wants attention. But it is helpful even though we're home. It can be kind of helpful to still do some meal prepping because, I don't know, you kind of want to maintain your same schedule. Like when you're doing work, like you want to be able to do work and not have to worry about going to do other chores, even though you're still home.
I agree. And I will say that it's not a huge deal to me, but I did find that even just a week, and then I think back to the times when I did meal prep, it definitely encouraged me to make more nutritious choices. Like, if I had prepped like energy balls for a snack, that's what I was going to eat. Like, it wasn't really a question. I mean, unless I really didn't want them, like I would eat something else, but I mean, they're tasty and I like them. So I gravitate towards them if they're in the fridge. But if I hadn't prepped any snacks, like, it's so easy for me, and I'm not saying this is bad, but so easy for me to walk into the pantry and just like see that there's like the chocolate bar sitting there and take a piece of chocolate where, again, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I do that sometimes still, but at the same time, it just encourages me to kind of make those more nutritious choices and feel better throughout the day because of that. Like, if I were to eat the piece of chocolate, I might be hungry again in half an hour. But if I eat a couple of energy balls that have peanut butter and hemp seeds and stuff in them that, you know, have some protein and some fat to keep me going, it just helps me kind of power through and like fuel my day a little bit better.
I totally agree with you. I have to admit though, right now, like while I'm preparing for some, like a pretty big school milestone, I don't find myself like having the desire or the energy like to do some meal preps. I'm kind of just like scavenging throughout the day.
But that's okay, right? Like, we all
because right now that's what's working
that's
for me.
Your priorities are different right now, and that's totally okay. Like, I think that's something that needs to be said. Like, we all have different, like, every year and every month we have different, I don't know, we're feeling different things.
It shifts.
We're prioritizing different things.
Yeah.
You know, I saw a dietitian once talk on her Instagram about how she had like a family member who was sick in the hospital. They had a health scare, and like she spent like 5 days straight like just at the hospital, like being with her loved one, and like she ate pretty much like chips from the vending machine and like chocolate bars and things like that. And like she said, like at that time, that was eating intuitively because eating wasn't her priority. You know what I mean? Like, what was intuitive at that time was like caring for a loved one. It wasn't fueling her body. And so there's no reason to feel like guilty or like you're not doing enough if you've got a big test coming up and you are preparing for that and that's your focus and that's your priority. Like, that's okay. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good, that's a really, really good tasty, Hannah. I love that.
Oh, thanks. All right, Tareq, you tell me what's been tasty for you this week.
So what's been tasty for me this week is shichimi togarashi. So it's 7 spice blend in Japanese.
Okay.
So the one I have, actually, I think has more than 7 things in it. But it kind of varies, like the different blends, I guess, like by different producers, different manufacturers.
Right.
It kind of varies, but overall the blend usually has like some of the main core components, and it's so perfect for making a soup or a noodle dish at home. Like it's that flavor, like that umami salty flavor of ramen. You know what I mean? It's like and I made ramen a couple times at home a few weeks ago, and it's just so perfect for that. So it has crushed red chili flakes in it, some sea salt, some Szechuan peppercorn. So it's like pretty typical like flavoring, right? But then it also has, the one I have anyway, has sesame seeds, poppy seeds, orange zest,
Ooh.
wasabi powder,
Yum.
and nori, like seaweed
Yeah.
flakes. So it's just so tasty. Like,
It sounds so good.
so yummy. Like, it's actually making me hungry right now.
Yeah,
Like, I
it's
wanna
making me
make
hungry.
some noodles and
Yeah.
and use it.
I want some ramen.
So that's my tasty this week. Yeah, so good.
I love that. I've never heard of it, so thank you for bringing it up. Now I
Yeah.
really want to make homemade ramen.
I know. Can a ramen company sponsor us?
Please.
Yeah. Yeah,
Come
so that's
on.
my tasty this week.
Love it. That's awesome. I love, you've been getting into, I mean, maybe not in the last week, but over the, I don't know, I guess the last 2 months, like this whole quarantine thing, it seems like you've been doing a lot in the kitchen. Like you made ramen a couple times. You made, what was it that you made? You talked about it, but it was from the Michelin.
Oh,
Star
that was so
Guide.
nice, like a pudding.
Yeah. Oh, it all looks so good.
I mean, I love to cook. I mean,
yeah.
I consider myself like a home cook.
You
Like I
are.
do all the cooking at home for Thomas and I. And, yeah, I love to cook. If I had all the time in the world, like I'd be going to like every farmer's market, sampling everything by hand
Yeah.
and making like fun, fancy dishes at
I
home.
love that.
Yeah, I love cooking.
Me too.
And I love cooking for other people.
I do too. It's so nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, another episode in the books.
Another episode. Please like and subscribe, rate and review.
Let us know what you
We'd love to
thought of
hear
this
from you.
episode. Yeah. Yeah, leave us a review.
Do you think you're sensitive to anything?
Let us know. No, but seriously, I mean, yeah, and tell us if you've had any experiences maybe with food sensitivity testing. We'd love to hear it. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
okay, wait, one sec. Quickly, I'm going to go onto Instagram because I need to shout out the person who asked us to talk
Oh yeah,
about
let's shout
this,
them out.
because
And you know what?
deserve
While
that.
you're doing that, I'm gonna pull up a review from our Apple podcast.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
say thank you to someone there.
I don't have a last name. We didn't last time actually, but Anissa, thank you for giving us this recommendation.
Anissa.
Yeah.
Bow, bow, bow.
Bam, bam, bam. Thank you, Anissa, so much for recommending this. We really enjoyed talking about it, and I think it's something that, needed to be talked about. So thank you.
So while we're in the mood of shouting people
Yeah.
out, which we love to do, I'm gonna shout out someone who left us a review on Apple Podcasts rather, Sarah McPhee. Sarah says, "What are the chances? I'm traveling this week to Europe," and this was from a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And your hot tips and tricks will definitely come in handy. Love the pod. So
Love
thanks, Sarah.
it.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
listening.
Sarah. I hope you enjoyed your trip. So that was in regards to our episode where we talked about traveling and nutrition, right?
I think so. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that was in season
Oh,
1.
their title for the review was Podfect Timing.
Oh my god, I love it.
Sarah, you wily little reviewer.
All right.
So thank you for that. If you leave us a review, we'd love to shout you out.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk to you
Bye,
guys next
Roxanne.
week. Bye, Roxanne. Bye, Copy.
Hi, coffee.
Bye.